how does a regenerative leader strategize for his or her business? And you can't really have a 5-year plan. You can have an intention and a vision of where you want to head, but that kind of rigid focus on Q1, Q2, Q3, I mean, it's insane. We are raised in a society where control and fear is quite dominating, and where our minds can set ourselves to do all sorts of things, and we have a very hard time letting go of things, although they don't feel right. And for us to be more regenerative beings, we need to be more in tune with what actually feels right and accept the fact that we need to let go of things. Letting go is an art form in and of itself.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth with me, Dan Burgess. Welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode 13. And this is a corker. This episode is with Laura Storm from based out in Copenhagen in Denmark. Now, Laura is what I would call a true force of nature. Laura is a thought leader, international keynote speaker within the field of sustainability. She's spent her whole career really making global business and organisations aware of the benefits of improved sustainability practices, helping global sustainable solutions have a chance of success and making the sustainability agenda more attractive. Basically, helping businesses be more awesome while being more awesome to people and the planet which sustains them. She's a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. She's won a Green Biz World Changer Award. She's on the World Economic Forum's Expert Network as an expert in sustainable development and climate change. She's an advisory member on the World Economic Forum Shaping the Future of Urban Development. She's actively shaped the Copenhagen Climate Council, the World Business Summit on Climate Change, Project Greenlight, and she led for several years the development of Sustainia, which is a platform and a bit of a mega brand within the sustainability space, sustainable business space, with a huge outreach of over 170 million people and about 4,000 plus sustainable focused solutions, which continue to be adopted. So you're probably getting a sense that Laura is a big doer with a lot of energy. Interesting though, today her work is progressing and is focused more on what she would call working towards a regenerative world. And we'll chat about that. We do chat about that in this conversation. What does that actually mean? But it's, the idea of circular economies and where people are thriving and business is done much more consciously. And she's doing that through co-creating a new platform called Regenerators, which I'll link to in the show notes. But what I really dig about Laura's work is the human dimension to it now, and her deep connection and intuition, if you like, with the more than human world, the wider natural world. And I think that's where we really connected during this conversation. If you want to pursue a sustainable world, we need to include the sustainable human. There is no sustainable business with burnt out, stressed people operating in the myth of infinite growth all year round and a sort of power dynamic of command and control leadership. There is no thriving next generation with kids being pushed through a sort of mechanized machine-like system of learning. There is no sustainable cities and communities with polluted air and water where nature is seen as a resource or a service purely for kind of extraction purposes. And without reconnecting to the wisdom of how life itself works, we'll probably continue to fry ourselves and the planet which sustains us. And that essentially human health and planetary health are intimately interconnected. So we riff a lot on this edge and in the conversation, and also interesting around the kind of burnout and breakdown, if you like, that it's featured in Laura's journey, it's featured in mine and many others, I'm sure, which I think is really an interesting place to explore. It's sort of a vulnerable place, but a really creative place to work from, with a sort of a new awareness and a new perspective. I think Laura ultimately is a child of the woods, and we talk about that relationship as well, and where that comes from, and how she carries that today through her journeying. So, okay, really excited by this. This was a great conversation. Let's get on with it. This is episode 13 with the excellent Laura Storm. So, well, Laura, thank you for finding the time to join me on the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I'm so excited.
Yeah, excellent. And you're in, is it Copenhagen? Is that
yes
for you?
Yeah.
Excellent. And I saw I was just looking a little bit on just on Twitter actually, and I just saw you've done something in Oslo this week that seemed to have generated quite a lot of energy.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Well, it was quite an interesting conference, the first of its kind, but quite a big setup around the future. How do we shape thriving cities of our future? And I opened the conference giving a talk on, well, who are we actually shaping our cities for? Mm-hmm. And just actually going back into more or less the story of our evolution, that we've spent 99% of our time on this planet as a species, completely in sync with nature, moving around like hunter-gatherers, constantly sensing into new opportunities, threats, and that we worshipped nature and saw ourselves as one with nature. But in the past kind of only 500 years, we have disconnected ourselves massively from nature, and created like a separation from it in a way that I believe is quite damaging to our psychology and mental health, and we have disconnected us from our natural habitat, and no species thrive doing that, but that's what we have done. And how can we then create cities where both ecosystems thrive and where human beings come alive? Because what I believe is that the stress we see currently, both in financial systems, our ecosystems, our social systems, are all interconnected. We have never been as stressed and depressed as we are today. I think Gallup last month, or maybe it was September, issued a quite comprehensive study on the global reported stress levels. And in the foreword, it says that collectively we have never been sadder, more depressed, more anxious than we are today.
Wow.
And I think that feeds in with the status of our ecosystems. We have lost 70% of our flying insects population. Many species have gone extinct. IPCC says we only have a few years to really solve this challenge. Our soils is depleted from important minerals. I could go on and on, you know, stats. But those two things just go hand in hand.
Yeah, right.
The more stressed we are, the less we are compassionate, the less able we are to think holistically, the more we consume. And then it's just this negative feedback cycle. So what I was doing at the conference was more to kind of step back a bit, and instead of having an intense discussion around Internet of Things and smart cities and technologies, which are important, an important component of building cities, thriving cities of tomorrow, I believe a critical component that is missing from that discussion and dialogue is what actually makes us thrive, and how can we build cities that feels like walking around in a forest, and how can we build cities that are in sync with ecosystems and actually produce ecosystem services instead of just subtracting them and exploiting them. So that was my point.
Yeah, that's a great way to start a session like that. I imagine that created quite a lot of energy. You used the word this idea of thriving cities, and one of your, at least I see, you're talking about this leadership for a thriving world is one of your missions, I guess. Tell me a bit about that. Like, what does leadership for a thriving world? What's that all about?
I believe that in terms of leadership, we are at quite a critical point. We are being kind of not forced, that's not the right word, but
Yeah.
we need to take things to the next stage of evolution in a way. And instead of, I studied at business school because, yeah, that's a long story I can tell you later.
Yeah.
But I wanted to understand the machine from the inside out. So I went to business school. I have my master's in basically, yeah, business, but also sustainable business strategies. And what I was taught in business school over 10 years ago was very much that old mechanistic mindset of exploiting all resources and only caring about shareholder value.
Yeah.
And also seeing human resources as something that you should exploit, and efficiency and KPIs and lean management and stuff like that, total quality management. All those things were very much what my generation and the generation before me was taught. And I believe that is utterly destructive. It's degenerative, and it doesn't unleash creative potential. It doesn't unleash the creative powers that we have within us. It suppresses us, and it makes us miserable. We have so much great potential being locked into a mindset where employees are basically just corporate monkeys, where they are driven by a great sense of fear that is kind of infusing our societies on many levels. So I believe the kind of new leadership that we need is one where we move away from the very rigid, exploitative, hierarchical structures, and instead we start embarking on a living systems mindset, where leaders see them more as ecosystems facilitators. So how can we build thriving partnerships with our stakeholders where we create win-win situations? How do I see the organization as a living entity where my role is to unlock potential, identify where are the acupuncture points where I need to kind of help make sure that potential is unleashed. Where are the major flows? Who are the keystone species? Applying that kind of mindset as an ecosystem facilitator, and see yourself as facilitating a process instead of controlling an entity.
Yeah.
And that is, to explain it quite shortly, that is the main shift we need in terms of leadership.
Because it's fascinating. Because I was sort of following your work, seeing your journey, and I can connect to quite a few some of this idea as well. And I was thinking back, like the sustainability agenda, and you spent many years with building the Sustainia brand, right? And I think there's a frame I saw you using, which was sort of making the sustainability agenda more attractive. And it feels like you can be good to just go back to that bit again and to see, because obviously now we're transitioning, at least your mission is transitioning to something quite different. I think, there's lots of signals that this sustainability is a thing, actually is, what does that really mean? And actually, we're trying to move into something quite different here. But can you tell me a bit about that journey and from this kind of sustainability agenda into something which is, the regenerator thing, which we'll talk about in a bit, but because it feels like that's quite a shift. There's something quite different, that's sort of a different kind of energy, a different way of thinking and looking at the world.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. So I started Sustainia really in the aftermath of the meltdown of the political negotiations leading up to COP15 and during the COP15. And I was quite involved in that, because as soon as
like COP15 was when, because that would
I'll give the insights. So a successor to the Kyoto Protocol had to be renegotiated, and in 2007 it was agreed that the point in time where we would do that as a collective, as the global society, would be in December 2009. 2009, in Copenhagen. So Denmark was given the honor of being the host of that process in the spring of 2007. And I got involved in a group called Copenhagen Climate Council. which I headed for the entire process leading up to the COP, alongside other great people. And that was an alliance of business leaders like Sir Richard Branson and Jim Rogers from Duke Energy in the US, the CEO of Chinese and Indian utilities. And the purpose was very much to kind of drive and make people aware of the business case for a strong global climate deal. So we traveled around meeting with negotiators and local business people and trying to build momentum. We hosted the equivalent of the COP15 negotiations. We facilitated a similar process, but for CEOs alone. We gathered 1,000 CEOs 6 months before the climate summit to negotiate the business recommendations, which was quite bold at the time.
And how was,
anyways,
I know it's a hard thing, obviously, because that's a huge community of CEOs. But
at
that time, what was what was the takeout from that community in terms of these sort of ambitions? The good thing that happened leading up to COP15 almost 10 years ago was very much that sustainability, climate change policies, what the name of the time was very much low carbon business strategies. Yeah, right.
Was very much put on the agenda, I think, thanks to the process and momentum that was built leading up to COP15. So the good thing about that was it made many global companies aware that this is actually something that is of relevance to us. But of course, I mean, there was lobbying on all kinds of level. But I think what we succeeded with was delivering quite ambitious recommendations to the negotiators and sending a strong signal both from Chinese, US, Indian, Brazilian companies that we were ready to act. And that doesn't mean that all companies from all those countries were ready for an ambitious deal, because if that had been the case, I think we would have had one by then. But we didn't. And I think a lot of the reasons why Copenhagen failed were, I don't know, maybe we weren't ready at that point in time. And thankfully, 6 years later, we got one in Paris. But it was also due to very few... sorry for just speaking my truth, but a few male egos that just wanted to kind of force a process through without listening to all key stakeholders, and just wanted to kind of force through something top down. So a few months before Copenhagen, things started to just kind of fall apart. And what happened those 2 weeks in Copenhagen were interesting and not pretty. I wasn't personally involved in the intense negotiations, but I was just involved in that process of business momentum and support. But that meant that after that process, many of us who had dedicated basically years of our lives for that were very depressed, and so was I, and just overwhelmed by kind of hopelessness of what can we actually do now. And so I started an alliance of global communication experts and companies that dedicated a year. We started about, I think, 6 months after the COP15, and the intention was that we all felt that what was really needed was a shared vision of what does it actually mean to live in a sustainable society, where are we heading, and what solutions are available. And move away from the very doom and gloomsday rhetoric and the pointing of the fingers and the catastrophe scenarios, because that doesn't motivate people. I mean, we have plenty of studies that shows that kind of communication, it triggers something neurologically, and it triggers our fight or flight. And when we don't feel that we have an opportunity to act and do something about that gigantic threat here and now, we pretend it doesn't exist. And therefore, we needed a new way of talking about these things. And we did a lot of things in that process. We developed principles for how to communicate about these things. We developed an animation series communicating about sustainability to kids with Pixar.
Yeah.
And then I also wrote the guide to Sustainia. And while writing the guide to Sustainia, I saw a bigger potential for turning that into an organization. And we got a lot of support from great companies and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Pharrell Williams. And then things just kind of escalated and happened
Characters
quite
with
quickly.
small profiles, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
No, I think the intention was that we can't just involve the usual suspects.
Sure.
Because they communicate to those that are already converted. We need kind of anchor people and supporters that can reach new target groups. So that was very much the idea of engaging a profile like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
And then Sustainia became a great adventure, and our campaigns reached millions of people, and we developed scenario reports for specific sectors and launched the Sustainia 100 solutions portfolio. And the intention was very much to communicate in a vibrant, exciting way what's actually possible, what kind of solutions already exist, covering 10 different sectors, making people aware that great things are happening out there, inspiring entrepreneurs to see the potential of creating sustainable kind of entrepreneurial adventures.
So that sounds like a busy time.
Yeah, it was. It was a crazy busy time. Also fun and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like learning by doing, really.
Mm-hmm.
What you've talked, I mean, obviously there's something of where that story went and I guess what has birthed your new journeys. But I'm interested, I think I've heard you say before that you feel a sort of big responsibility on your shoulders to show up for the planet. And I'm really interested by that. Tell me why that is. Where does that come from?
That's a good question. And I don't think I have the answer to that. It's just something that I've always felt. I was this sensitive, weird, introverted kid growing up in the inner Copenhagen. But thankfully, my parents sent me to forest school. And for me, being in nature it felt like my natural habitat. It felt like that was really the space where I could be myself. And I felt very connected to trees. And was just was always very aware. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and that point in time, sustainability was not something that was discussed. What was discussed was ozone layer and acid rain.
Yeah, I remember it.
My parents were very much into organic produce and helped inspire me in that direction. But I also always had this kind of sense of responsibility. And I remember being around 8 or 9 and seeing a documentary about how the Amazon was completely being destroyed by oil companies. And that really, really kind of woke a worry in me. And I started this campaign for kids where we raised funds to buy up pieces of the rainforest. So it's always been kind of like, this sense of responsibility that has been both good and bad.
I mean, it intrigues me because I feel similar connections and have done, and I spent my childhood feeling most comfortable on my own in the woods. So I'm interested where that responsibility thing comes from, because why do some of us feel it very, very, very strongly, this kind of responsibility or care, or what is it for something greater, and for others it's not as obvious, or sometimes I'm just curious about that. And
I don't think any of us has an answer. If I had to give you one, I think it would be of a more esoteric character. I think some of us are just born more in tune with that and are here because we have an important mission to change things. And I've always had this sense that my life and the time that I've been given on this planet, that has been quite clear to me from an early age, that the time I spend on this planet has to be spent, has to be a value. It has to be a value of what matters the most to me. And that's still very much how I live my life. I crave desperately, and maybe sometimes too much, to have an impact and to be able to look myself in the mirror and tell myself that I'm making a difference. And I think some people have that as a driving force more than others.
No, it's super interesting, and I think so. You were talking about the back to the cop stuff and the kind of ego, particularly sort of the male ego side of things, and I guess the art of listening, or that wasn't there at that time.
Exactly.
And it's interesting seeing, sort of feeling and seeing in this really coming through a lot now. You know, the sort of not just the need for listening on so many levels, you know, just like the need for people to be listened to and the need for kind of leaders to listen. You know, so everywhere you look, you kind of sort of sense that actually there's a lot of power in creating more, you know, these practices of listening more, and that's a regenerative practice, I would say, right? Or it feels like
For sure, and it's also something that we teach in our leadership seminars.
Right.
We teach so what kind of practices is regenerative leadership practices, and something that is quite interesting now that we are talking about the process leading up to COP15. And then comparing it with the process leading up to COP21. And of course, it had the advantage of learning from the failures of Copenhagen. But there was something else that was quite interesting. So the lead negotiator from France, the host of the COP21, Nicolas Hulot, is one of, I think, France's most kind of charismatic and impactful environmentalist, and has been fighting for the environments since he was a kid as well. And it was quite remarkable that he was being asked to be in charge of the process by the French president. And of course, in collaboration with the UNFCCC, which is the UN kind of entity that is facilitating the climate negotiations. The head of that, Christiana Figueres, was appointed after the COP15. So the two of them was a strong team. Christiana Figueres is amazing, and she's known for prioritizing events where you listen and speak from the heart.
Yeah, no, I've done a bit of work with her last year, and she's an extraordinary woman.
Yeah, she is, and she very much prioritized meeting all kinds of people. And Nicolas Hulot and Christiana Figueres also hosted and facilitated a below the radar summit for key negotiators and spiritual leaders in France 6 months before the COP21, where you were not allowed to bring PowerPoint or prepared statements. All kind of heads of states and negotiation leaders and spiritual leaders present for those 2 days were called to speak from the heart. And we had all religions represented, and there were small ceremonies facilitated by all major religions. And it was, I'm told I was supposed to have been there, but I had a major injury a week before that, so I couldn't go.
Right.
But everyone was just in tears because they were asked to speak from the heart about why are we actually doing this, and why do we need an ambitious result in Paris. And I think that process played an instrumental role in making sure that we actually succeeded in Paris.
Yeah, right. And this is what's so interesting, I think, about this idea of regeneration. And in many ways, and maybe this is, you can talk a bit more about the story that evolved from you from Sustainia and onwards. But my sense is, at least when we're talking about, I guess, we're talking about renewal, we're talking about restoring, we're talking about reviving. For me, there's a sense of, I guess the question the area I'm interested in is, like, do we need kind of breakdown, if you like, in order for regeneration to happen? And I'm sort of curious about that at lots of different levels, personal, organizational, whatever. But do you see where that's what I'm looking at here? But yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because if I look out now, I'm looking out in, I'm lucky. I've got a little garden. I've got some patches where I grow veg. I've got some trees, and I look at, we're right now in England. It's, it's moving into winter. It's clear that there's been a lot of breakdown, a lot of letting go. There's stuff going on around me which is suggesting there's some death happening. There's some, you know what I mean? It's like, so, but outside, the the business world and the kind of our cultural world, it's getting faster and faster, right? We're getting towards Christmas and the advertising stepping up. And what's going on here with all this whole idea of regeneration? And I know that's a big
I would like to address that on two levels, because that whole understanding of the fact that we are cyclical beings and we are living on a planet that is cyclically in tune with the sun and the moon, and that's something that we have totally neglected integrating into our lives. We live our lives as if we were in constant spring and summer, and we have collectively created a pressure on ourselves to constantly be flourishing and in bloom and putting new stuff out into the world. Yeah. And there's a lot of shame and stigma attached to taking things slower and not being a success as we would define it. Success as in, look at me in my new project, or look at me in the outside world. Whereas what we teach in our seminars, and a critical component of all of what Regenerators do, is that we should celebrate autumn and winter, and that every day needs all 4 seasons for us to thrive. Right. And we need that time where we retreat, regenerate, recalibrate, because we can't be in constant production mode. We can, and that's what many are doing, but that also means that what they produce lacks a lot of richness, a lot of depth, and people feel miserable while they're doing it. And many are so disconnected from their own inner nature that they almost really feel or have an understanding of how they feel and what they want and what they desire, and are very much lacking a contact to their intuition. And for us to thrive as a species in a way, we need to integrate all seasons in our day, and as I say, celebrate the winter. Yeah. It's such a restorative, amazing process, and for me, it was something that I had to learn the hard way. And I learned it because I had an injury in the summer of 2015, a minor traumatic brain injury, which meant that I basically couldn't do anything for more than 2 years.
And you'd been going flat out to that point, right?
Oh yeah. It happened from one day to the next. And I thought that I was living like the life of my dreams because I was working on something that I had been passionate about my entire life, and we were doing well. And but looking back, I was not thriving at all because I wasn't really in tune with myself. So I lived a life from my head, and honestly was never really truly satisfied wherever I was. We could have had a successful event at work with Sustainia, and I always would have this sensation that it wasn't quite good enough, or moving on immediately to the next thing instead of being present with that moment and celebrate it. I would always kind of be intensively on to the next thing, and my weekends were very much. My partner at the time, not at the time, he's still thankfully my partner, but at the time I drove my partner mad because I tried to live our weekends as if it was a project we had to succeed as well, making all kinds of plans and stressing around and just like being a nightmare to be around, to be honest. And then I had this injury, which meant that I couldn't do anything, and no doctors could really help me. I just needed time to heal, and in the beginning I wouldn't accept that. I couldn't believe that. I just wanted back to my mission immediately. I hated being this vulnerable, sensitive human being because I was extremely sensitive. I couldn't tolerate sound, and I couldn't be around people. I was just nauseous and feeling terrible all the time. And my coping strategy was to apply my project management hat. And investigating all kinds of doctors that could potentially heal me.
Right.
So
Looking for the fix.
Yeah, totally looking for the fix. I mean, please help me, get me out of this nightmare. And of course, nothing worked because it meant that my brain was in constant high beta. And a brain in high beta, like fight or flight mode, cannot heal. And it was my brain who needed healing.
Right. That's the regeneration piece, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it took me many months. Nothing that I'm proud of, but I've just accepted it.
Yeah.
I think it took me, about 4 or 5 months until I finally got it. It was quite a symbolic moment in a way. It was a few weeks actually before the COP21 in Paris. It was November 2015, and I had constantly been to my team like, I think I can make it to Paris, and and you just do your thing, and I'll be ready for Paris. And then 3 weeks before Paris, I had to look myself in the mirror and accept the fact that I could barely go to the supermarket. So there was no way that I could. I mean, even going to the airport would be like impossible. So I canceled, and instead I booked a silent retreat in the forest while COP21 was going on.
Yeah.
And that became quite a fundamental shift for me, just kind of surrendering completely to silence.
How long was that for?
Yeah, I think the retreat in itself was only like 4 or 5 months, but it meant that I started to integrate that into my life completely. And I just kind of completely accepted the fact that I could not work.
Yeah.
So there was no trying, and there was.
It meant that letting go, basically. On
totally front. Letting go, shedding ego completely, and just spending time in nature.
That's huge to totally let go. I mean,
it is. But it also, I mean, I'm not. I don't want to sound like a hero. I mean, it didn't take me 4 or 5 months to let go completely.
I mean, I only say because from my own experiences, I had a trauma experience, 28, burnout, became type 1 diabetic, and I didn't really let go for quite a few years. I tried, but I just didn't give myself the time, and fought it. And of course you never really break through because you're still holding on to something. So I think it's a very interesting, I have let go of it now, but it took me. It's
something you can apply to your life in so many levels, right? We are raised in a society where control and fear is quite dominating, and where our minds can set ourselves to do all sorts of things, and we have a very hard time letting go of things, although they don't feel right. And for us to be more regenerative beings, we need to be more in tune with what actually feels right, and accept the fact that we need to let go of things that doesn't feel right, instead of spending a lot of time and energy and resources on making that thing feel right.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just can't. And letting go is an art form in and of itself.
I think so. And then because allowing yourself to grow in different ways, and ways that you can't probably even imagine at that point, and I think that's how
exactly.
I've sort of seen
and that's a main point in terms of how does a regenerative leader strategize for his or her business. And you can't really have a 5-year plan. You can have an intention and a vision of where you want to head, but that kind of rigid focus on Q1, Q2, Q3, I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
What we need is to have and kind of nourish a receptive responsiveness and an evolutionary purpose of constantly sensing into what is my entity asking of me to create now. And I don't mean that you need to do that on big things from day to day. I mean, of course, you need to have some plans in place. It can't just be chaotic, but it's about prioritizing a new way of your entity, your organization, being constantly in tune with what is actually the right thing for that entity, instead of just sticking to a rigid plan that you agreed upon with your board of directors 6 or 12 months ago. That's kind of insane, because we live in a world that is changing constantly and rapidly all the time. So we need a new approach. And that also goes for how we live our lives, to just let go of what we thought at the beginning of the new year or whatever, and instead practice that, constantly sensing into what are you being called to do at certain and given moments.
Yeah, and I've seen you mention this side. Well, for you, like trying to prioritize stillness and creativity. I think you've said, and tell me a bit about that. Like, because my sense of that is, sort of being still in a world that is just going 100 miles an hour. Tell me about that, and why is that important for you?
It's important because I don't want to let go of what was nurtured inside of me in those 2 years of silence. It's important for me to not let go of that ability to have creative impulses. For example, Regenerators was something that, this is going to sound a bit weird, but I'm just going there. It was something, I mean, the whole entity, the vibe of it, the colors, the kind of the frequency, what we were called to do as this entity, kept coming to me in dreams, or more or less like in a meditative state, because I spent a lot of time and still do meditating. And it was something that happened quite quickly, and it just felt like this kind of force, okay, it has to be birthed now. And that is definitely something that came from being very closely connected to what my intuition is telling me is the right thing. And it doesn't mean that I don't want to sound like a perfect hero that has it all sorted out, because it's something that I need to constantly practice as well. Because when I came back into the world about a year ago, things can easily get busy again. But what I try to make sure I have is space around everything. Space in when I plan my week, I make sure that I have those autumn and winter time kind of spread it throughout my week, because I know I need that to recharge and constantly nourish that relationship to my inner nature. That means that I can show up into the world in a way that I feel is the right way for me to show up. But it is a constant practice, and it's one that I need to constantly remind myself of, because it's easy to get carried away with work.
Right.
But so far, I will say that I'm very serious about continuing this path and not letting go of that contact. So far, I would say that I have succeeded sticking in tune with my inner being.
I think though this is such an interesting thing, though. It's such an interesting edge. It's funny, as you were talking, a message just popped up onto my screen, and it's from a buddy of mine that I go surfing with, and I don't live near the coast, so it's, for me to go surfing is quite a big deal. But this is part of my regenerative practice, and he just said, I know, what about this? There's some waves Monday. Do you find that? And it's sort of, and again, if I were back, if I go back a few years in my world, and my work would be like Monday morning, going surfing? Are you crazy? But I know what that will do for me, and then what that will do for those around me.
Exactly.
My family, the people I work with, whatever. And so,
isn't there a book called "Let Your People Go"?
Yeah, well, that's exactly. Yeah, that's Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia, and
yeah, exactly.
But that's, for me, it's just it's for whatever it is that we all have things, right, that help us connect with our inner. Our inner self, or ground us, or regenerate us, right? And I guess this is the thing that's so interesting. And maybe we can get into the Regenerator mission that you're now developing. But this whole idea of regenerative societies and cultures and leadership, and they're all whatever it looks like. But these things feel important to me. This idea of knowing intuitively what you need, what your being needs in order for you to do good work in the world, and again, whatever that looks like for people. But I'm really interested in that, because it's so countercultural as well, though, right? Like this idea of, you know, I'm parking this time this week, you know, that's my time. No, it's not a weekend thing. And people go, well, isn't that a bit selfish, or isn't that a bit, you know, but no, right? It's completely opposite, because if I do that, then I'm going to be able to give so much more.
Exactly.
It's so interesting.
And I've let go of kind of justifying it to people, and sometimes I'm just like, no, sorry, I have a meeting, and they don't need to know that it's a meeting with myself, but it is.
I love that, meeting with myself. Brilliant though. But I get that, but it's almost like, but that's the kind of stuff that you want to hopefully see normalized, right? That this is good, this is important, valuable stuff. To be able to, because I think I've heard you use the phrase inner sustainability, and
exactly.
You know, tell me about that.
And that's as I said in the beginning, it's because I strongly believe that the stress that we have on all levels and in all systems are interconnected, just like everything in life is interconnected. And for us to solve this, we need to address this in a more holistic manner. And I think for me, it's just incredibly important that it doesn't just become a discussion around inner sustainability without the outer sustainability, for example. We need both. We need both the technology, the financial mechanisms, the political agreement, and companies needs to integrate the right kind of solutions, but they also need to create their mindset and their work culture, and be responsible for what sort of stress levels they are creating through their employees, because everything we do in life, the solutions that we decide to employ and how we treat our employees create ripples effect far beyond what we can imagine. And that's also something that we talk about in our seminars, that we need to create and nourish this holistic mindset of everything you do in life is an investment in what kind of world you desire. And it goes on all levels. It's both how you treat your employees, your co-workers, and how you go about your day. And that can have a massive impact if you change things in a more regenerative direction. And I think because of the dominating culture of being very much in our head, in our rational analytical minds, we have also created sort of an understanding in the sustainability community that it's only about circular economy and the right kind of mechanistic implementation
it's
methods.
Kind of what we do today, but just like in a more low impact way, but it's still kind of business as usual, sort of.
It is, and it's about doing less bad in many ways. And I would like to take things at a new level and start having discussions where we dare to speak from our hearts. And instead of conferences where we show a lot of crazy complex slides of emissions reductions and blah blah blah, that doesn't really connect people. And I don't want to disregard that. It's important that we have an awareness around our emissions, etc. But I just really deeply desire a discourse and a discussion that is more holistic and where we dare speak as human beings that are custodians of our planet. And we have done a terrible job at being that so far. So how do we change things around?
And so this is I guess this is where the Regenerators mission is, right? This is what your work is now evolving into. This kind
exactly.
This kind of twin. It feels like there's these sort of, someone phrased this interesting, but there's these sort of twin trails, or, there's the inner work and there's the outer work. There's the kind of work of our organizations and our businesses and our communities, but there's also this interconnection with who we are as living things. Tell me about Regenerators. Where are you heading with this, and let people understand a bit about what it's trying to do.
Regenerators is seen as a collective, and let me start there first, because what does that mean? So what I desired after having been a leader in a very hyper-masculine world, where we are very kind of focused on carving out pieces to ourselves and having the right kind of titles and building castles.
Yeah.
I wanted something new. I wanted something that felt more expansive, more collaborative. So I did not want to set up a new organization and call myself the CEO, and start hiring people. That felt really old school.
Yeah.
What I wanted and what I craved was a shared mission around creating thriving regenerative societies that focus both on regenerative design, circular economy, biomimicry, etc. How can we change the mindset of how we design systems and services, but also regenerative cultures in our organizations, what we've talked a bit about, regenerative leadership, etc. And then the third level is regenerative living, what Giles Hutchins, who is one of my main partners in Regenerators and very much an instrumental part in setting all of this up from the beginning. He and I are working on a book right now on regenerative leadership that hopefully will come out in the summer next year.
Yeah.
And what we work on and the levels that we work with on the 3 levels of learning from nature in that exact book, and the mindset that we also teach in our seminars is the concept of a living systems designer, living systems culture, and living systems being. So the third level being, how do we create awareness around regenerative lifestyles and how we can be living more present life, more integrating the awareness of us being cyclical beings. So it's meant to be a collective, and for now it's only 4 people in a collective. We will soon start adding more people, and basically what we want is to create a movement of regenerators, practitioners and professionals who are all working from their heart and are dedicating their lives to address these issues that I just talked about. And are dedicating their lives to being a regenerative force in this world. And many of those people are working independently and have their own studios.
Yeah.
And they can continue doing that. That Giles has his own company as well. But sees a value, for example, in joining forces in the movement behind Regenerators and that vibe and that mission that we are on together. So the intention from my side is very much to create something that we're all proud of, holding each other hand by hand instead of working in these silos, because we can't afford that. We don't have the time for us to working in our own little corner. We need to stand together, and we need to join forces, architects, biologists, systems thinkers, designers, leadership experts. We need to go hand in hand in this mission, and that is the kind of home I want to create with Regenerators, making it a lot more easy for us to co-create projects and get funding for that. We're working quite a lot right now in the space of regenerative architecture and cities. But my dream is for that to expand and for Regenerators in the collective to create new projects and initiatives that are all addressing the mission of Regenerators. So it's very much a desire for me to create a new way of doing an organization. And that takes constant kind of checking in with me, what does actually feel right. And also constant ego shedding on my side, to be completely honest, because we all have an ego. And I don't want to be as I said, the CEO, or this is my thing. I want this to be our thing.
Yeah.
So that also or means that I constantly need to check in, because I don't want this to be my thing. I want this to be our thing.
It's so fascinating because there's so much going on there, and I guess this is this thing of also, like, you know, you're transitioning to these different ideas, these different models, these different systems, and it's, you know, we're sort of, you know, and I think that the whole idea of, you know, ownership and leadership and organizations that are designed in different ways, and yeah, it's messy, right? Because this starts happening live, you know, and you've talked about the architecture piece and the city piece. Is that why is that? You know, I guess that's one area of this work. But tell me a bit about that, and why do you think, why are you drawn to place?
I think what we have prioritized this first year, because we launched in February.
Yeah.
And on purpose, I have not wanted to grow the collective massively, because I wanted to kind of anchor it first instead of inviting everyone who could be of relevance,
Sure.
because of a need to show a lot of people on the website. But next year will grow, it will grow more.
Hmm.
But the areas we focused on this year and will continue to be main priorities is regenerative leadership. How do we change the mindset of how we actually run our organizations? Because that's so massively important, and that's the mind shift that we need right now.
Yeah.
And how can regenerative leaders be trained to think about the inner and outer sustainability, and that is not just about circular economy and biomimicry and stuff like that, which is incredibly important. It's also about how, all the inner stuff as well.
Yeah.
And then another component that we believe is incredibly important is soon 70% of the global population will be living in cities.
Right.
And it's also the place where people are the most afraid, anxious, and depressed. And to turn that around, we need to focus on how do we build cities where people come alive and where people can truly thrive. And how can we have an aspiration to build cities that functions like a forest and that actually produce ecosystem services instead of just taking advantage of ecosystem services. So for me, that's something that is incredibly important. How can we create those guiding stars, those regenerative hubs that can serve as a flagship or a beacon of light that shows that this is actually possible.
Right.
When we work holistically and integrate a lot of different expertise and mindset. So that's something that I'm very passionate about, because leadership and where and the physical kind of manifestation of how we live our lives in cities is such a critical component.
And how does where you are, like, because from the outside, like, so someone like Copenhagen, for instance, always seems to feel like there's energy for this. Tell me, is that a city that's on its way to being a regenerative city? Would you say, or?
I think it has its potential, but it's also, I mean, Denmark and Copenhagen has for a long time been sort of like the good students in terms of sustainability, but it's also about continuing to have that political will. And right now that doesn't look that promising.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will change in the next elections, but it's something that we need to constantly be mindful and careful about. There's some potential in Copenhagen as a city because of its size and because of the political environment in Copenhagen that is very supportive of keeping that position as being a sustainability pioneer. So there's definitely a lot to be said around that. And what I'm keen on is how can Copenhagen be a living lab for a regenerative lifestyle, a regenerative architecture, etc. And thankfully we have a lot of global pioneers who are based here in Copenhagen. So there's a lot of potential, definitely.
Someone's I think I stumbled across something, I think it was on a podcast, I can't remember, but it was talking about the aspen forests, or the tree that that it's a tree that shares the same root system. So you have this individuality of these individual trees, and these forests can grow to huge scale, but actually they share the same root system. And I thought that was something really interesting in that around. So the individual is connected to the whole, right? The whole forest is.
Yeah, and that goes for the mycelium in all forests, right? That all trees are interconnected and share resources and can communicate via the mycelium that is the fungi attached to the roots. And we have the potential to do the same on many levels. A very practical level is to see it's. I mean, the mycelium is very much what it's also called the wood wide web, and we have the internet, and we have the sharing economy is one example of how can we use the internet as a constructive force in terms of making it easier for us to share our resources.
Yeah.
But there's another level as well, of course, that whole understanding of us being interconnected on many levels, and that we're really all one.
And there's something interesting
via...
about this idea of my health is also connected to your health. There's something about that idea of this, these shared root systems, and this idea that because again, that sort of, if we are moving from a I guess, a paradigm which was about, you know, get
Mm,
ahead of everyone else, you know, and,
mm.
you know, I can't, you know, but if there is something around this, you know, actually your health, your wellness is important for my health and my wellness. And
Yeah, and that's very much how the forest thinks.
right,
When a tree is not doing very well, its friends around it does everything to give it all the nutrients it needs,
right,
um, to thrive and come get on a good trajectory. And it's not until it's just there's no hope left for that tree that then that tree makes the decision to kind of before it dies to make sure that every nutrient it has left in its branch is given back to the system and its friends, and no one is stronger than the weakest link, and that's something that the society we have today has very much lost touch with. That was also critical for us when we lived as hunter gatherers in tribal cultures. We were one organism, and if one was suffering, we were all suffering, and we did our best to help that individual. And that's something that we have lost touch with completely.
yeah, no, it's that whole thing I think is super interesting how to, and I guess is part of this whole regenerative idea of, and back to maybe where we started from, where you started from, about how, you know, this idea of caring and caring for something bigger. I'm conscious of time, and we could keep going for sure. Where can people find, or, you know, how can people connect with the work you're doing, and just give me a sense of how people can get on this journey, or how they can understand more about the work you're doing.
Go to our website and sign up to our newsletter, where we are constantly communicating about new initiatives. Become a member of our Facebook group, which is the best alternative still. We are looking into other means of creating global communities, and there could be a lot of interesting things coming up next year. Communities where we can easily share ideas and resources, publications, etc., and create this movement of regenerators. You could, of course, also attend some of our seminars. New ones are coming up next year. I think that's
Great. Well, I'll put all those in the show notes as well.
great.
So there's
Thank you.
a question I'm asking folks that I'm chatting to on this podcast. So obviously my inspiration of the Spaceship Earth and Buckminster Fuller, and there's a really interesting idea for me that I've always connected to, which is, you know, we're on this kind of rock. It's a life-giving rock, and we're hurtling through space, and it operates, you know, it can regenerate itself, and it, you know, has an operating system which, if everyone kind of adheres to, will keep this planet thriving and living. And there's this idea that I think Buckminster Fuller articulated, which I love, which was, you know, there's no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. It only works if everyone is contributing to this thing. And so, knowing, you know, where you're at right now and the work you're doing, where would you encourage crew right now? Where do we need crew? What should people be focusing on, or where could you encourage people to go to now or participate? Where are the crew needed in your opinion right now?
Well, I believe that the transition to a more regenerative world has to focus on how can we integrate the three levels of learning from nature. What is the DNA of and the logic of life, which is living systems design. How can the products and the services that I use, how can they be conducive of life? How can they be aligned with the principles of life, meaning are they regenerative in and of itself? And be a conscious consumer in terms of the choices that we all make, because we are making investment in the world that we want every single day. And what kind of culture are my actions contributing to? Are they regenerative in and of itself? And what kind of lifestyle do I live? Do I live a regenerative lifestyle? Do I show up as the full potential that I can? And constantly be aware of those three levels and tune in with that, and look at your lifestyle and see, am I be a regenerative force for good, or am I being a degenerative one?
Amazing. Laura, thank you for this and taking the time out. to
Thank
come
you
and
so
chat.
much, Dan. I really love your podcast,
Oh,
and it's such an important initiative. So thank you for taking that. I know myself that it takes quite a lot to run a one man, one woman podcast show.
a one human show.
Yes.
But it's all good. But listen, no, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm going to, I wish you loads of vibes and great energy for where you're going. I think it's amazing, the Regenerator mission, and your journey is super inspiring. So we'll keep in touch for sure. And
Yes.
yeah, we'll connect again. But thank you for the time.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Laura, take care now.
Bye.
Bye bye. So that was the most excellent and inspiring Laura Storm. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I certainly did. Yeah, keep an eye on Laura's work with the Regenerators and her co-creators behind that. I think that's going to be a really interesting journey that she is moving through now from 2019 onwards. So yeah, that was episode 13. So thanks again for listening. I really appreciate the time. I really hope that these podcasts are, giving something to you. And on that note, I'd love to hear any feedback. I get a few bits of feedback from people, which is just super cool to get a little nudge, a little signal from here and there. I really appreciate it. So if it's something, if there's stuff here that you're enjoying, please, just give us a signal. You can DM me on Instagram at Dan Solos, or on Twitter at Dan Solo, or drop us an email, dan@danburgess.earth. All feedback is really lovely, and also if you're enjoying this, please and you think someone else might, please do share, and also if you're listening on Apple Podcasts and you like what you're hearing, again, just give us a little rating or a little review. It all helps more people find the show. So lots more coming this year. I've been upping the conversation, so I've got a few more to get out, and my plan this year is to get a more regular momentum behind the Spaceship Earth podcast. Which is always challenging, as I'm a one man operation, and so trying to find that regular momentum is the challenge for me this year, and amongst everything else in our crazy lives. But and there's I'm hoping the Spaceship .earth site will go live very, very soon. I've been working on that, so that'll bring all these podcasts together. So I want to close this episode thinking about the Spaceship Earth mantra that there's no passengers on Spaceship Earth, we're all crew. And just a thought for someone who, at least in my view, is probably like the sort of the uber crew member right now of the Spaceship Earth, and that's Greta Thunberg, climate activist from Sweden. I think she's 16, maybe 15, and I've been just following Greta really since she did this talk at the end of last year at COP21. If you haven't seen it, just Google Greta Thunberg COP21 and have a little look at how she talks to the leaders of the world who are responsible for kind of trying to act on the big issues that are facing us as a planetary civilization. And she's actually right now at Davos. And it's interesting, I've been chatting about Greta or pretty much every sort of meeting and session I've been in January, just as an example of someone who, with the courage and bravery to speak to power and to speak how it is, and just like what could we learn from how she is standing up? And she's at Davos right now, which is this sort of gathering of the world's power in the mountains to sort of talk about the problems of humanity and what to do about it. She's there talking to various panels of leaders and stuff, and she's just an extraordinary. I'd love to get Greta on the Spaceship Earth. If anyone knows how to do that would be great to have a conversation with her. But she's at Davos right now. She said something last night, I think it was. The reason I'm here is to give my message to the World Economic Forum at Davos. If we don't start to care about the climate issue and take action, then nothing else they have to discuss here will matter. And it's just, it's absolutely true. David Brower said back in the 70s, there's no business to be done on a dead planet. And 40 years later, it's even more true. But yeah, what an incredible individual. She started this climate strike, schools climate strike in Sweden, basically striking, taking time off school to strike, basically to protest against the government's lack of action on climate. Basically saying, we're in school, we're learning, we're being pushed through a system to take us through to a world that is clearly going to struggle to operate if we continue to ignore the signals. And that movement is popping up and spreading all over the world. Schools all over Europe taking action and striking, and it's spreading. And I think, I think these voices, and particular voices of the younger generation, we should be really listening to this, because many of us, and you look at all the issues, many of the issues in the world today, a lot of the complexity and enormous uncertainty is going to be picked up by the next generations coming through. And we could go on about this, but I guess what I'm saying is check out Greta, and how can we find ways to really listen to these extraordinary voices that are coming from the younger generations, who really, I think, are sort of seeing what is going on, and we should be listening to. So I'll leave it at that. Take it easy, everyone. Go well. Peace and out. Until next time.